So, hi everyone. Today we have with us Miss Amrita Chakraborty. She's a senior associate in the urban development team of sustainable cities and transportation at the World Resources Institute, India. Here, she's engaged in environmental planning and resilience related work, and she's also involved in the vulnerability and resilience assessment of Mumbai and Kochi. Prior to joining WRI, she worked for 6 years as an urban and environmental planner in sectors pertaining to climate resilience and urban policy development. She has handled projects funded by international donor agencies such as the World Bank, the Department for International Development, the Asian Development Bank, and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Her work experience spans over various types of organizations, including the Ministry of Environment, the Government of India, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the Energy and Resources Institute, or TERI. In her free time, Ms. Amrita likes to paint, read books, and engage in recitation. She's also interested in dramatics and photography. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Ms. Chakraborty.
Nice. Like I have the brief up about my work has already been said. So yes, presently I am working with WRI, and my present engagement with the organization is I am involved in Mumbai Climate Action Plan, which is on the verge of being completion. Like it would get completed maybe within a couple of months. And it was really a very exciting experience for me to get involved. And prior to my work with WRI, I was mostly involved in projects related to climate resilience, then your assessment and evaluation of different infrastructural and government-related schemes, urban development-related schemes. And yes, so basically, and I like being a I come from a social science background. So in my work, I like to focus also on the aspect of how community resilience, how the informal groups, the vulnerable groups, their issues can be dealt with the more planning interventions. So yes, this is a brief up about myself, and yeah.
Yeah, no, I think all that I've read about the work that you've done is really interesting. And so I'm excited to ask you some questions today. So my first question for you is, smart city is a term that's now thrown around a lot in conversations about urban development. As an expert in the field, please can you define what exactly this term means, particularly in the context of climate change and developing countries?
Okay. So smart city, the concept, it came with the smart city mission that was launched in 2014 by our ministry. That time it was, I guess, Ministry of Urban Development and Ministry of Urban Development. This concept mainly has come from the West, from the outside countries. And the basic aim of this mission was to create some lighthouse cities, which would, by promoting different kinds of innovations, technological innovations through digital platforms. So initial idea was that, but with time, with these things, now the problem, as you know, that climate change, the changing climate, a lot of disasters are also, different cities are facing this kind of disasters every day, some in every parts of the country, say. So there was a increasing need to integrate this concept of smart cities, that is your technological innovations, with the aspect of how the climate change that issue can be dealt with. So that gave rise to the concept of climate smart cities. So this climate smart cities, this is also an initiative by Government of India. And through this, we try to see that the cities, they try to see how, from the perspective of handling this recurring issues of disasters, this climate extremes, how those issues can be tackled better through the digital platforms, through different kinds of technology. And at the end, it would have a final goal to make people's life more sustainable. And also that by making people's life more sustainable, I mean, or by including different sectors of the society. So the focus again changed to inclusive planning. So all these aspects got intertwined with the concept of climate smart cities. And then Government of India had also come up recently, like 1 or 2 years earlier, with this framework called Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, by which the 100 smart cities that got selected along with other Amrut cities, they over there, how much they are prepared, like in terms of climate preparedness, disaster risk preparedness, how much these cities are prepared based on certain criterias which government or based on this framework has been identified, like your with respect to green buildings, energy efficiency, urban planning, mobility, air quality, etc. So this is how I would say that like we can't directly copy the concept, just a cut copy paste of the concept of smart city, what's adopted elsewhere, that we can't do. But definitely, since India is a country which regularly faces this issue of changing climate extremes and all, so how that concept can be much more localized, can be much more adapted to our environmental, to our socioeconomic scenario. So now I think the paradigm within smart city mission has also changed, and more focus is being laid on climate resilient planning, climate smart cities planning, etc.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that, I think what you just said, it really aligns with what I had read recently in a paper about the differences between smart cities and sustainable cities, and now how we're moving towards this idea of a smart sustainable city, and something that addresses both the technology aspect and the adaptability to climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the second question I have for you is that you've conducted a vulnerability and resilience assessment of both Mumbai and Kochi, which are coastal cities. And so what have been your key takeaways on the most vulnerable stakeholders, and what action we need to take to improve their resiliency?
So, like in my studies, just a small like correction. I have, like, initially it was thought that I would also be working on Kochi, but I have presently not worked, and my focus is completely on Mumbai. So I guess since both of them are coastal cities, so the methodology, the approach would be being considered in similar fashion. So in Mumbai, what we did is, as a vulnerable stakeholder, we mostly initially we identified what are the different kinds of climate disasters that the city is prone to. Like majorly, the city is prone to flooding, waterlogging, and your heat, urban heat, increasing urban heat extremes. So through those, we tried to spatially map like which are the areas which is facing maximum these problems. And from there, we also mapped that as a vulnerable stakeholder, the most important vulnerable stakeholder I would consider are the people, the low income people, the people who stay in the informal settlements, in the slum areas. And we tried to, when we kind of overlapped the spatial extent of these disasters over the spatial extent of where these people are staying in the city, we found a very interesting correlation that it is actually the areas which are occupied by the slum dwellers, by these people, the daily wage earners. Those are the places which experience maximum the brunt of this climate disasters. So, but actually, they are not the causal factor. The causal factor is something else, but they are on the receiving end. So, our focus as a part of this planning process was how these people can be made more adaptable, how they can be, their risks can be reduced, their capacities, their adaptive capacity can be improved. And so I would say that one of the important way in which through planning, we can integrate them is basically we have to integrate their causes, the issues, the problems that they are facing with respect to this climate extremes in our planning process. And that can be done through a method called inclusive planning. Inclusive planning where firstly we are identifying who are these vulnerable groups. So, and also within this low income people, it is actually more the women, the children, the aged people who are bearing the problem the maximum. So now when after identification, through different kinds of workshops, through training programs and all, we need to basically make them also a part of the planning process. That can be done through participatory planning. Like they have to be made, they have to be involved to, like when we come up with different kinds of solutions for these people, it is actually, we have to make them involved and make them identify what can be the best suitable solutions in that area, in that locality. So I would say the basic approach of the planning should be bottom up, and through the bottom up approach through participatory planning, and also more from a city, not more from a city lens, city level lens. We have to zoom in more into the local issues, localized areas. So more plans, community through community participation, community engagement, more number of ward level plans, more number of neighborhood plans that have to be come up. And then that can be integrated with the city master plan and all. So I think this is one of the way in which their resilience, because their issue identification and making them part of the planning process is very important.
Yeah. And I think like what you said about inclusive planning. So a while ago, I read this paper by Quick and Feldman, which spoke about distinguishing participation versus inclusion in your planning processes. And I think it spoke about how, whereas in participation, there is this idea of involving various stakeholders, but inclusive practices in specific, to quote them, all parties involved co-produce the process and the content of their decision making. And so I thought that was a really interesting way to put it, that like participation is more than just hearing out the voices, but and which brings it to inclusion is when you kind of integrate the voices into the process itself.
Exactly. So now in this Mumbai Climate Action Plan, if you have seen the website, we are looking into the 6 sectors. So in each of the 6 sectors, when we are proposing the planning interventions, we have a separate section on inclusion. So inclusion, like every goal we are kind of setting up for every sector, we are trying to see that goal, how that can be achieved through how these how the interventions can be specifically for these vulnerable groups. And then, like, for example, I'm giving in terms of transport, when we design any kind of bus stop or a bus design, we kind of develop RAM. So through RAM, that helps the people with physical disabilities to move into the thing. So, and also like while road designing, while in the junctions and all, we have special signages for the old people, for the crossing of the old people, for the children. So these are some of the very small ways, I think, in which the inclusive planning can be promoted. And as you have rightly said, that their interests, their issues can be integrated. And nowadays, I think children, there is also the concept of child-friendly cities. So where we particularly focus on how from the part of planning, how the children, they can be made as their issues can be seen more vividly.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, in your experience working on public sector projects, what is the biggest obstacle in the way of urgent action, and what changes do countries as a whole need to adopt to improve efficiency and, again, inclusivity?
So yes, since from my experience of working with different kinds of public sector things, we know that in India, in different, whether it's in the state level or in the central level, for the efficiency, for the effective working of any one sector, a lot of departments are involved, a lot of stakeholders. I would focus mostly on the government level stakeholders. A lot of departments are involved. But most of the times, these departments, they work in silos. Like they have their own agenda. But for whether we talk in terms of planning, whether we talk mostly in terms of implementation, in terms of monitoring, these silos need to be broken. And there has to be more interdepartmental coordination when we talk about in terms of data sharing, data management. And also, I would say that this interdepartmental coordination is also required when like a plan is proposed or a project when it is in the operational stage, when it's for monitoring the project, what is the impact of that project on the local people and all. So in those respects, I think data, interdepartmental coordination is thing, first point. The second is data. Data gaps is again another important problem that we face now, and more so publicly available data. Like even if the data is collected, even if the data is archived, but when people want to access that data, they don't have that provision. So data should be made more, data transparency should be there. The ambiguity should be reduced. So I think these two aspects, if it is looked upon, then the faster at the planning stage, the implementation stage, at the O&M stage, everything can be faster now.
Yeah, so my next question for you is, a lot of times the argument of development at the cost of conservation is made, which leads to delayed adaptive strategies, particularly in low-income countries. So to what extent do you think that this argument that that conservation impedes development, or that development can't take place without certain communities, or without without biodiversity, or generally the environment being affected, to what extent do you think this is valid? And do you think that we should focus more on adaptive measures to climate change or to mitigative measures in this context?
Okay, to your first question, I would like to say that to me, both are important. Like whether we should go, like we can't do away with development, only conserve nature, or we can't do only development and not conserve nature. But what can be done as a solution to this is something called a cost-benefit analysis. Or whenever you take up any project or whenever you take up any scheme, you first need to see that which is weighing more. So whether the developmental cost is more, or whether the cost of conservation of the nature is most, that is outweighed. So based on that, a proper cost-benefit analysis will only help you to take the decision, like whether you should go. But again, the going with development or going with conservation doesn't mean that you cannot do two things together. You can definitely do two things together. And again, we can, and as a part of this development versus conservation, in the nexus, I think, comes the people, the local people. So there, the local people, the community improvement projects, the livelihood improvement initiatives, if that can be taken and that can be somewhat integrated with the conservation of the nature, then I think development and conservation can go, both of them can go side by side. And for your next question, that whether a tackle climate change, which is important to me, I would say both are important, because both are looked from two different angles. When we talk about mitigation, it is about how we are trying to reduce the carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So mitigative measures are, on one hand, will help you to reduce the temperature, reduce the local these things of place, as well as you are also enhancing the capacity of the local people, the government, the different kinds of stakeholders, and making them, increasing their ability to withstand the climate disasters. So both of them is required to handle for proper handling. And actually in my present project, that is being done. Like we are doing a vulnerability assessment, we are trying to improve the adaptive capacity of the local people, as well as we are trying to make the place more energy efficient, trying to go for renewables and all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that especially now, I think with recent projects in our country itself, it's become clear that development and conservation don't have to be these mutually exclusive ideas, right? Like, for example, I think there was an elevated stretch of the national highway through the Painch Tiger Reserve. And I think there was a lot of controversy before, but they ended up making it elevated so that both development and connectivity between cities could be created and the animals could be less affected. So
exactly.
And so my last question for you is, what advice do you have to the future generation of environmentalists, activists, policymakers, and climate scientists?
I would like to say that, yes, this issue, like with presently the COP26 is also have started, this issue of climate change, conservation of biodiversity is day by day becoming very important. So I would like to say that along with this conservation, along with this climatic factors, environmental factors, we should not forget about the social aspects. So integration of the social aspect, making, again and again, I would say that making the local people part of the planning process, that is more important. So I think that should be understanding. You have to understand the problem. So that problem will include your local this issue, local environmental issues, local socioeconomic, demographic issues. So both of these things, if is looked out holistically and dealt with, I think that will give a better result rather than looking only to. In fact, in case of planning, also the paradigm has shifted. Previously, it was more on physical planning, looking into the structure, looking into just the layout of the city. But now, community resilience, more people-centric plans have evolved. So I would say that work with more with the local people. Their issues need to be highlighted more in the plans.
So thank you so much for joining us today. And I particularly really enjoyed listening to you speak about the importance of, like you just said, including local communities in planning. And I think that's really what we need going ahead, because obviously technology and incorporating technology is really important. But I think that may not have any effect if it's not inclusive, or if it's not taking into account the people that are actually living there, right? I really enjoyed today's conversation.
Even I enjoyed interacting with you. It was a very nice interaction.